Survival, the spec that still makes people salty that they forgot how to use a bow. Well, maybe they didn't actually, but let's not talk about the unpruning and the fact that Arcane Shot is a spell you cannot or ever will use in the current iteration. Alongside Steady Shot, both of these were added to remind you that Survival used to be a range spec, and you need to get over it. Is Survival a good spec though? Is it a meme? Well, I am here to tell you it's neither and both at the same time. That doesn't really make it a lot of sense. But in that case, let's check something that does make sense. And that is, of course, buffs and nerfs and legendaries in 9.1 for Survival Hunter. Currently, 9.1 Survival, and by extension the rest of the Hunter specs, have received legendaries just recently. On top of that, Survival has been buffed. And on top of that, we still need people to subscribe and enable the bell thingy. Yes, let's start a movement. We like doing what we are doing, and supposedly you like watching our stuff, because that's why you're here. 2 clicks makes us incredibly happy and grateful and helps you get some of our other stuff in your inbox. Guides, tier lists, podcasts, and streams. So what are you waiting for? 2 clicks? Thanks, man. That was awkward. Just transition. Please. As of this recording, Raptor Strike has seen an increase to its damage scaling component based on the total attack power, where on live servers it would deal damage equal to 100% of your attack power. On the PTR server it would be 115%. Same thing with Flanking Strike, which was marginally weaker on live. I think it was kind of competitive on its row, but you will have a scaling from 117% of your attack power bumped to 135. Lastly, Mongoose Bite sees an increase from 90% attack power scaling to 103.5%. The numbers on the screen are basically taken from my tooltip on the same hunter on the same servers with the same buffs activated, and this is all rewarding single target performance. More on that later. For now, 3 legendaries have also been data mined as well. In 9.1, you will get Covenant legendaries, and so far we have everything but the Venthyr one. Fragments of the Elder Antlers is the Night Fae one. It essentially reads when Wild Spirits hits fewer than 5 targets, there is a 200% chance for each target to be damaged by Wild Spirits a second time. Not sure what the 200% chance is supposed to mean, but we can assume that the proc is guaranteed. It seems to want to address single target performance or at least cleave to low AoE scenarios, which are indeed where Survival struggles more than anything. As to how good this legendary is, we need further testing to be done, since right now we cannot really tell. I couldn't find the legendaries on the PTR. Maybe I'm doing PTR wrong, but not all of the buffs and changes are implemented at the same time, so we'll see how that develops. But that can be said about all the other legendaries. The Kyrian legendary Pact of the Soul Stalkers adds a different spin to your role in a group where your resonating arrow will give your party members a 5% critical strike chance for as long as it is up. This feels weird. This reminds me of the Warrior Necro banner of buffing your group. It's likely you will get 5% crit chance as well, but even with all of that, having 5% crit chance in a legendary slot seems incredibly underwhelming, and the added effect of 4 more people getting 5% crit chance, so maybe a 25% total crit chance added to your group, might not make it so the power from this legendary can justify something like Rylax or Soulforge Embers. However, the Necrolord's Lego is on a different level. Bag of Munitions will make your Death Chakram also apply Explosive Shot on up to 5 targets. This can potentially make for some incredible scaling in AoE scenarios and reminds me of the Unholy DK quadratic scaling. It's not the same, but close. Imagine your Chakram hitting 5 targets, each target gets an explosive shot that blows up and hits every other target, up to 6 if the AoE cap on it remains the same. So, essentially, you can have a pack of 7 mobs that can get hit by Chakram. 5 of them will get an explosive shot that will damage 5 other targets, including themselves. So you would have each of those 6 targets getting hit by 5 explosive shots every 45 seconds. This sounds like incredible AoE potential for a spec already uncapped in AoE. This legendary sounds like incredible amounts of fun in dungeons as well. Not sure about single target fights. And even in AoE, right now it has to contest with our current Grenade legendary that drops bombs whenever you use Wildfire bombs, and those bombs you drop also are uncapped AoE. It's a tough competition and it will have to do more damage than it, at least to make it worth it for the Necro Hunters. All in all, the bonuses are good. They address the core issues of survival, which is the single target performance. There are still core issues with the spec that it keeps it from duking it out with the top dogs, as not enough single target damage buff. The mastery is still awkward and has always been one, if not the worst stat to get, at least compared to the other ones. Not to mention stuff like Mongoose Bite relies heavily on haste stacking to be competitive, and the whole spec has been relying heavily on haste to perform overall. Looking at the current raid analysis, Hungering, for example, pretty much all single target bosses, has survival perform lower, if not the lowest out of all of the DPS. Take Sunking as a counterexample, where survival is the best performing spec out of everything the hunter can put out, on average. And yeah, I know there are PIs going into this and people playing parses, but so is everybody else. Everyone is paying priests for power infusions nowadays, and the game is kind of evened out at some point. Sure, it's not 100% reliable, but these are the numbers we can work with, and at the end of the day, these are the numbers. The spec is not as bad as people think, it just has some balancing issues. Take Sire for instance. Survival right now, as of this research, is one of the better specs on the boss. There are currently 10 parses for survival on Sire. I know Thighmind for instance is one of them, and Thighmind has been one, if not the best survival in the world for a very long time, at least starting with 8.2 that I have noticed, probably earlier than that as well. Sure, there could be a few marksmanship people or BM players that might be better than a few of those 10 survivals, but numbers are numbers. Survival is not doing too bad, and at least for some metrics, it's ranked as the 4th best spec on Sire right now. Is it the 4th best spec on Sire overall? Probably not. This is taken into account close to Bisque gear, high eye level, everything farmed, grinded, and perfected to the teeth. If you wanted to progress into Hall of Fame, you might not have taken survival at all a few months ago. But this is mainly talking potential, and survival has potential. A big part of that is because Sire has a big AoE phase at the start, and a lot of classes that excel in AoE will outperform the rest. Again, take all of this with a grain of salt. This is just a raw perspective on the spec. There is more that goes into this kind of thing. You also have the Mythic Plus meta to consider, which is heavily skewed by community perception. Overall, it looks like survival is still a bottom spec. And although in raids it deals decent damage, the fact that it's weaker in single target is no secret. And that is made painfully obvious if you actually took the time to look at what the spec is like in dungeon environments. You can see a few of the overall performances from some of the top survival hunters when put against fire mages and balanced druids. You can see that if survival isn't out DPSing them, it will at least give them a good run for their money. And some of you might say, looking at raw numbers is not a good metric to judge performance by. And to you I say, yes, you are correct. There are other things to consider: skill, utility, synergy, pre-made compositions that can sometimes circumvent the DPS performance, and people taking their survival friends over a Windwalker or an Outlaw because they are friends and because they are actually good survivals. Sure, we can make all of those points, but you are still interested in DPS. You are mostly looking at meters when judging what spec to play, regardless of how many other different types of arguments us or anybody tries to make to establish the pure fact that meta is no more important than skill and knowledge. But there you go, nobody can contest the fact that Hunter has good utility in the group to help with affixes and bring things like bloodlust and traps and stuns and roots and so on. It also has damage. The only real argument I could accept against bringing a survival hunter in a group is if the group was lacking single target damage and needing no additional AoE damage, and the lack of single target damage could make or break a supposedly tyrannical key. Which takes us back to the issue it has. Single target performance is lacking to the point where you have to squeeze your butt cheeks to get a perfect parse, and would still likely be in the bottom half assuming the rest of your raid members were of equal skill. Fury had similar issues or similar overall performance issues at the beginning of the patch, and it has received a few incremental buffs that eventually propelled it to the upper half. It's one of the best AoE DPS specs right now, and I feel like survival could get the same treatment. It's been years of survival being brushed aside as a meme spec, as a bad spec. Obviously, the outrage culture will make it seem worse than it actually is, but it's not without its problems, and we can only hope the devs would keep revisiting the tuning and add a few more iterations of these types of buffs. What do you guys think? Maybe leave your opinion in the comment section down below or join our Discord and have a chat about survival. And you can also find the link to our Patreon page in the description, because, dear patrons, your support helps us so much in making all of this possible, and we cannot thank you enough. If you, dear viewer, like to support us a little more, you can find some cool stuff on our page you might be into down below. Thanks for watching the video. See you next time. Why is it awkward? See you next time. Don't edit this out. It's fine. Is this gonna be a blooper? Bye!
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.